The following public service program is brought to you by the Metropolitan Library System. And now, read about it with your host, B.J. Williams.
We have a great show for you today, including a talk with Richard Rattenbury about his book, Art of the Arms Makers. But first, Susie Beasley is going to talk with Phil Talbert about one of the videotapes you can check out.
Phil, tell us a little bit about this book, Beautiful Gardens Made Easy by Meredith Books.
Well, this is a fun book with, I would call this a book for instant gratification when you're doing your gardening at home, because it gives you 39 little projects that you can select from to transform a dull-looking area into a beautiful green and floral section. You can use real flowers, and there are things for indoors as well as for outdoors. You can use real plants as far as gardening vegetables or flowers. You just make your own selections of things. It gives you about 200 plants that you can select from, and it gives you the ideas of how to make them look good and where to grow them and how to take care of them.
Well, how is the book organized?
Well, it gives you, it's sort of like a cookbook in a sense, because it tells you how to do making your welcoming area, your front part of your house look nice, or setting up a partition between your home and the home next door, or using plants for entertaining, things like that. And then within each of those little sections, it breaks it down into chapters that give you how to do different things, like doing a walkway, or doing a front porch. And taking
Because it has landscaping.
Right, landscaping, taking an urn or something and filling it with flowers and changing it out 3 or 4 times a year to give you that seasonal
the container
look.
gardening.
Correct, that type of thing. So you get a variety of kinds of things, and it's done with the idea that you can complete a project like this in a weekend. And I think that's a good idea for people that are working all the time and they don't really have a lot of time to spend during the week. They can get something done over the weekend and be done with it in time for the next week, and they can come home in the evening and enjoy it. That's really the fun thing about that book.
So what other materials do you find that we have in the library system that relates to this?
Oh, wow. We've got lots of things, everything from landscaping to specific things on roses and azaleas, rhododendrons, all kinds of flowers, bulbs, summer flowers, flowers for all seasons, as well as gardening, things like that. So, and this is a good time to start thinking about your coming season, too, in January, and that it's a fun time to start making plans, and the library has a lot of materials, both book and non-book format, too, that you can
And this one has quite a few actual color illustrations and photographs and things like that. Peter Strauss is a person that we've seen in television and acting, so he's got some little tips also.
Oh, yes.
And some recommendations.
Exactly. He's quite a gardener himself.
And of course, this particular book, it was published by Meredith Books, but along with, I think, Miracle Grow.
Miracle Grow, yes, yes, yes.
Well, Phil, we really appreciate you coming and sharing with us Elvin McDonald's Beautiful Gardens Made Easy. That's available at your local library, brand new book, and available at your local bookstore. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
I know it is wet, and the sun is not sunny.
Hi, my name is Jose Jimenez of your Metropolitan Library Commission. You know, most experts tell us that if you just spend 20 minutes a day reading to your child, you're not only building a bond that lasts a lifetime, but you're also preparing that child to learn how to read. Check with the experts at your Metropolitan Library for suggestions on just the right books for you and your family. And visit us at our website at www.metrolibrary.org.
You know, Doug, there is a great place in every library, regardless of what your interests are in books.
Yeah, what place would that be?
That's the place where they put the newest books.
Ah, yeah.
Each library has a shelf or a set of shelves, depending on how large it is, where their very newest acquisitions. So the latest science fiction book, the newest trading spaces, how to decorate your home in 5 seconds for only 50 cents.
Yeah.
And everything else is there, and you can go right there and find the latest of everything. That's usually where I look for my review books. Obviously, they keep all the others for past reference, but you know, if you want the very latest. And one of the books I found recently is a book about a dog who goes to Europe.
A dog who goes to Europe. Sounds like a Disney movie.
It sounds like a Disney movie, but it is not. It's called Ella in Europe, and it's written by Michael Koenig. And he is a writer who lives in Hollywood. And it
will be a Disney movie.
We're getting close. It almost is. Ella is a very special dog as far as Michael is concerned. She's part Labrador, part Greyhound, very well trained. She's a therapy dog. And what that means is she's gone through a whole lot of training and certification, and she visits with Michael nursing homes and convalescent homes and homes for all kinds of disadvantaged people. She's gone to shelters for abused women and so on and so forth. People just really respond well to pets. And so she goes and even, as he said, even if it's just momentarily, she makes people happy. And she's been such a wonderful dog for him. He describes a point where he was divorced, and apparently for 6 months his ex-wife had custody of Ella. And apparently that was a very, very bad time in his life, but he was reunited with her. And he said he couldn't think how to demonstrate to Ella that she's been a very good girl her entire life. And it has bothered him the whole time he's been in Hollywood that there are a lot of places that he goes that Ella can't go. If he wants to go to Denny's to get a donut, Ella has to wait outside. She can't go on a lot of the beaches and everything. And he said, and yet she's well trained enough, she goes to hospitals. And so he took her to Europe, where you can, he lunched at probably the best restaurant in the world with Ella sitting beside him. So this is both a travelogue and really a love letter to Ella, the dog. Anybody who likes pets or is interested in visiting Europe, I think, would enjoy Ella in Europe. And it is a delightful book. They ride on canals in Venice. They ride on canals in Amsterdam as well. So,
and it is nonfiction, right?
It is nonfiction.
Okay.
He and his girlfriend actually took Ella to Europe and visited, except for England and Spain, where they won't let dogs on trains.
Oh.
So they didn't go there. Coming up next, we have Kids Corner. Kelly Rhea will be talking with Ronna Davis about a great book for our young adults.
Hello, today Ronna Davis is here from the Edmond Library. She's the young adult librarian there, along with many other duties. She's brought a book called Child of the May. It's by Teresa Tomlinson. And tell us something about Child of the May.
Well, this book is really designed to appeal to girls who are interested in medieval times, along with stories about Robin Hood. This is kind of a Robin Hood story told from the point of view of Maid Marian, who here is referred to as the forest wife. And as you can kind of guess from that name, the forest wife is the person who lives in the woods and takes care of the wounds of the merry men, and kind of the things that you would think that Robin Hood's friend would do. She's also a midwife, so she's a very female-identified character. There's the character that's on the cover of the book is a young woman named Magda, who is portrayed as the daughter of Little John. And
so it's loosely tied to some of the previous legends.
Exactly, it's loosely tied. And I was reading a little bit about this author, and apparently she was raised in England, and she was kind of steeped in these kinds of you would almost call them myths, not history. And she uses a lot of the settings that she's familiar with from growing up in that very part of England and incorporates it, so it makes it a very lovely book to read. And besides that, it's just a rousing good story. And the women are heroes in this. They actually go out and they shoot bows and arrows in defense of this woman and her daughter who are being kept prisoner, and it's kind of unusual in that way. And women in medieval times aren't often portrayed in that way. So I would recommend it for anybody, especially girls, who are interested in that time period and are especially perhaps interested in Robin Hood. And although Robin Hood is called Robert here, and haven't really figured that
That's
out.
to differentiate just a little bit
Yes.
who's important in the story.
That's true. And boy, you figured that out and you didn't even read the book.
I love these kind of books. It's called Child of the May. It's by Teresa Tomlinson. You can find it at your favorite bookstore or at your local library.
Well, Doug is back with me, and it looks like you've been visiting the new bookshelf.
As a matter of fact, this is a new book. It just came out in the end of last year. It's called, excuse me, it's called Trouble in Tombstone. Guess who it's about? Time's up. Okay. Yes, it's a story. It's a novel, historical fiction, told from the point of view of Wyatt Earp, as an old man who's looking back over his days in Tombstone.
Okay, so it's not a Western? You referred to it as an historical novel, which I think is a little bit different than a Western?
It's a little bit different. Usually when they sell them as historical novels, for one thing, they can add $1 to the price. But also, they tend to be a little bit closer to real literary novels. And with the emphasis is not so strongly on action, it's more on character. And so anyway, as I say, this is from Earp's point of view. Now, of course, anybody who's a good American has some sense of
Wyatt
the
Earp.
gunfight at the OK Corral in 1881. But in the 1990s, some new documents were uncovered, and a lot more scholarship was done, people taking the event a little bit more seriously. And this is the first novel that I've seen that has taken advantage of the new research in the 90s. So the character of Wyatt Earp, as we see him here, is a little different than he's appeared in the past. The approach, the book's by Richard S. Wheeler, who's a longtime Western writer from Montana. But his approach is that Earp is the good guy, and that his brothers are all good guys, that they're honest lawmen who try to be fair with everyone. But that he's not very, Earp is not very sophisticated when it comes to political wheeling and dealing. And Wheeler's approach is that the whole thing was a political conflict. It wasn't just good guys and bad guys and rustlers and lawmen. It was more Democrats and Republicans, and who was going to take control of this new territory in southern Arizona. And Wyatt Earp admits later on, I didn't really understand what was going on there. Another interesting and different approach is that the gunfight took place close to a photographer's studio, a man named Fly, F-L-Y, who also rented a room to Doc Holliday. And so Holliday lived above Fly's studio. And it's close to the corral. I've been to Tombstone. It is. It's very close. And one of the things that Wheeler is saying here is that these cowboys, the bad guys as we think of them, were meeting where they did because they weren't going after the Earps. They wanted to bump off Doc Holliday, that they had some trouble with him. And they thought, if we can get rid of him, then it'll be easier later on to go after the Earp brothers. And so what they were really wanting to do was wait until Doc Holliday came out of his room and then shoot him. So anyway, it's a slightly different approach to the gunfight at the OK Corral. The history is pretty good, the historical background. Wheeler admits that he's fudged a few details. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good book, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Coming up next, we have M.J. Vandeventer from the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. She'll be talking with Byron Price about a book that he wrote and obviously enjoyed very much.
Byron, so nice to have you back.
I'm glad to be here, MJ.
And this book, Fine Art of the West, is a gorgeous book. You should be so proud.
Thank you, I am.
And tell me how it came about.
Well, this book came about, probably the idea for it started 20 years ago.
Really?
I grew up in a family that appreciated fine boots and saddles and hats and cowboy gear of all kinds. My father was in the western wear business and saddlery business for almost 50 years, and so I came by this honestly.
Well, you really did. Well, it's just beautifully done. And what surprised me was that there was so much fashion in it.
Well, cowboys have a fashion sense. It's not always evident to outside observers, but within the fraternity, whenever they can afford to, they look as, their best up to what they can afford. And that's certainly evident by the works in this book.
And of course, your father sold Western wear, so that's an obvious tie-in.
Absolutely. And as time passed, and as the beauty of the cowboy image and the cowboy myth is that it's very participatory. And so a lot of people have participated in the myth by putting on the clothes, and the more people who have adopted that as a fashion statement, if you will, and even taking that further into the fashion for their horses, the more they have had a demand for ever more aesthetically pleasing gear.
And how did you decide what images would go in the book?
Well, we took images from several major private collections. They were kind enough to open their collections up to us, and also we took images from 3 different museums, their collections: the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, Wyoming, and also the Autry Museum of Western Heritage in Los Angeles.
So you had a lot of help with this book, a lot of participation.
Absolutely, and it couldn't. No book like this is a solitary effort.
Well, it's beautiful. Thank you so much for bringing it and for sharing it with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Byron Price is the director of the Charles M. Russell Center down at OU. Next, we have an interview that I did with Richard Rattenbury, who is a curator at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. I was at the Centennial Book Festival at OCU last year, and he talked with me about one of the catalogs that he has put together, which is an absolutely beautiful book, and I think you'll enjoy what he had to say about it. What was the inspiration for the Art of American Arms Makers?
Well, the genesis of this was an exhibition that was presented this year at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum from mid-February through mid-May. And the thought behind it was actually to pull together some subject matter that was exhibited elsewhere in our galleries. For example, we have a gallery that treats hunting in the American West. We have a gallery that treats fine firearms that were also used in the American West. And of course, in the Atherton Gallery, we have a lot of the Western art done by the artists and illustrators that also had this commercial side that was used in the arms and ammunition manufacturing marketing efforts. So it was really a natural to bring those 3 things together in a graphic form so people could see that there was a lot of artwork generated by those 3 facets of American culture.
In the book, you talk about the golden age of illustration, and that there was something specific in our technology that seemed to fuel that.
Yes, actually at the beginning of the 19th century, the process in art of lithography began, which is printing on stone. Litho is stone. By the 1820s, they were hand coloring these things, and then ultimately they developed techniques to actually use crayon or grease pencil colors, or what was called liquid, it was like paint but not actually paint, called touche, so they could actually recreate the whole image on stone in a series of impressions, one color at a time. So that this sort of color lithography or chromolithography by the 1870s was a pretty well perfected art, and it was used to reproduce all manner of things, from city views and maps to Civil War battle scenes to rural scenes, and ultimately sporting art. The sporting art genre was also adopted into this art form. They also did classical European paintings, so there was a broad spectrum of artworks that were reproduced by this means, and it was so cost efficient and so new, because this was really the first way to reproduce color imagery, that it had a high impact on both the commercial advertising industry and also just on the home consumption of art. This really made art available to the middle classes, and so from about 1880 to about 1930, they call this the golden age of chromolithography, or the golden age of illustration.
And you actually talk about that quite a bit in the book. I thought gave a very clear idea for the novice reader of just what is involved in doing this. And this was something that sometimes the arms makers or the manufacturers actually took art that was not necessarily created to advertise something, and they added something, didn't they?
Quite right, yes, and they also did alterations. One example, though, of an actual augmentation would be a Philip R. Goodwin painting called Cowboy Watering Geraniums, and he probably did this just as a Western image, and it's a cowboy who's watering geraniums, literally. It's kind of a domestic scene, but the Remington Firearms Company purchased rights or reproduction rights to the actual painting, and then when it was reproduced on stone, that is when the copy images were made, the lithographic artist, who was called a chromiste, added in a Model 8 Remington rifle. He also altered, if they look closely at the image, the can that he's actually doing the watering in that holds the geranium was changed into a Remington UMC, which is Union Metallic Cartridge Company, into a cartridge box instead of a tomato can. So these kinds of augmentations were very possible during the replication process.
Now, you have some really big names in this exhibit. I was quite impressed. I knew that Remington was considered quite an illustrator, but I guess I didn't realize just how much of what was not necessarily intended, as we just said, to sell a specific product, how much of this was converted into advertising.
Well, Frederick Remington, for example, we're talking about the artist now, not the arms maker. He did a lot of black and white illustration that was reproduced in woodcut originally for Harper's, but by the time he was painting, a number of the arms makers were interested in his artwork, and he did work for Marlin Firearms Company, for Smith & Wesson, and also for Winchester. One of the works he did was called His Last Stand, was done for commercial purposes, and the actual original artwork now is in the Sid Richardson Museum down in Fort Worth. Shows a couple of cowboy hunters in confrontation with a bear. Well, Marlin Firearms Company bought rights to that painting, and then reproduction rights, and then their chromolithographic artists just reproduced the central figure of that painting, a cowboy on horseback with his rifle at the ready, for their excuse me, 1890 catalog cover. Ultimately, it evidently had such popularity that they had the painting totally redone by another illustrator and adopted it as the company logo, and it still is today. You see that horse and rider image for Marlin both in color and as a black and white silhouette.
Mm-hmm. Well, there were also a lot of catalogs, calendars in the exhibit as well. I was quite impressed with a number of them that seemed to have more than one illustration on each one. I'm looking here in the book to try to find those.
Well, yes, when the calendars first came out, and Winchester was the earliest to do this, they started in 1887. They would pull vignettes from Harper's or Scribner's, for example, but by the 1890s, they were using Frederick Remington throughout the 1890s. Frederick Remington and A.B. Frost, Arthur Burdett Frost, who was probably at the time the best known sporting art painter of the time. And early on, these were a series of vignettes. There was usually a central vignette above the calendar pad and then 2 or 3 smaller vignettes scattered around the calendar pad. By 1900, this had evolved into usually a single predominant image above the calendar pad and just some border work or some sales text around the pad at that point in time. And out of that then came, in the early 20th century, many of the companies also started making large wall-hung posters, were just a recreation of the whole painting with just some advertising text at the bottom. And you can see in several instances where obviously the commission was made, where the foreground was basically left blank so that the lithographic artist could fill it in with the company name and any pitch line they had.
Well, that is a startling collection, I thought, of works, because one of the things I appreciated about the book was showing both the original and then the use that was made in the lithography as well. And I want to thank you very much for telling us about arms and advertising.
Well, you're most welcome. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Morris, Executive Director of your Metropolitan Library System. You know, experts tell us it's never too early to begin reading to a child. If you spend just 20 minutes a day reading to a child, you're not only building a bond that lasts a lifetime, but you're helping that child to prepare to learn how to read. Visit us at the Metropolitan Library System and let us help you select just the right books for you and your family. And be sure and visit our website at www.metrolibrary.org.
Well, Doug Benton is still sitting beside me, and that means it must be Writer's Almanac time.
It must be, and we've got two writers to talk about this week. March 28th, 1908 was the birthday of Nelson Algren, who was kind of a naturalist writer. He won the first American Book Award for fiction in 1950 for his novel The Man with the Golden Arm, which is about drug addiction. It was later made into a fairly popular film. Algren started his writing career down in Texas. Didn't stay down there very long. Really, Chicago was the city that inspired him. And his other best-known novel, I suppose, is A Walk on the Wild Side, which is kind of a black-humored look at a drifter down in the French Quarter in New Orleans in the 30s, and the con man and the other low-life types that he gets involved in down there. Our other author this week was born on March 31st in 1809, and that was the Russian satirist and playwright and poet and novelist and short story writer, Nikolai Gogol, whose best-known novel was probably Lost Souls, and the long short story Taras Bulba, which was kind of written under the influence of Walter Scott and the other historical novelists of that time. Gogol's great play is The Inspector General, which is a story of a young, inexperienced civil servant who shows up in town, and all of a sudden everybody thinks that he's the big shot inspector general who's come to check them out. And so while the corrupt politicians have to cover their tracks for this guy who decides to take great advantage of it.
That sounds like a movie plot.
It does. As a matter of fact, Danny Kaye made the movie. A very, very weak adaptation of the play. The play is much stronger in its satirical thrust than the movie is. My favorite Gogol is a short story called The Nose, about a man who wakes up one morning and his nose has disappeared, and he has to follow it around the city because it's taken on a personality of its own. It's a story about social climbing and losing face, as it were.
Yes, yes. And you can check out books by these authors and many, many more at your favorite library. Look us up on the web at www.metrolibrary.org. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.